I'd like to welcome everyone to the Arizona Game and Fish Department's presentation on the Heritage Fund. A couple of things first. People viewing this presentation through the webcast can submit questions at webcast@azgfd, that's GeorgeFrankDavid.gov. We will be accepting questions and having a question and answer period at the end of the presentation, which is likely going to last roughly 45 minutes. With that, we'll begin. My name is Ty Gray. I'm Assistant Director with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. To my right is Gary Hovatter, Deputy Director for the department. I'll be providing the presentation. Gary will be providing some information, and then at the end, like I said, we'll answer questions. So to start, the presentation is a Heritage Fund, what its loss will mean to Arizona. As a business model, user pay, user benefit agency, the Arizona Game and Fish Department receives no state tax dollars. Ultimately, the source of every dollar this department spends is a discretionary decision by a customer. As with any business, the department has customers with expectations for both services and information, and as with any business, the future of the department depends on meeting those expectations of our customers. This presentation was developed in response to the public inquiries regarding the effects of the governor's proposed fiscal year 2010-2011 budget plan, which was released on Friday, January 15th, 2010. Excuse me, the impacts on wildlife conservation in Arizona. The plan targeted the state's $4.5 billion deficit. The budget plan did include a permanent reversion of the Heritage Fund and repeal of the Prop 105 voter protection, which would affect the Wildlife Conservation Fund potentially. This presentation includes a description of and analysis of the effects to the department's Heritage and WCF Fund programs and the resulting impacts on the state of Arizona. I'd like to begin with the state's authority. The Department and Commission's authority resides in Title 17 to manage all wildlife as property of the state, and the Commission establishes broad policies for their management and harvest. Pre-heritage, the Department's non-game program was actually started in 1983. This was to improve management of non-game and endangered species. Prior to 1991, critical activities such as habitat evaluation, non-game program access, land acquisitions, wildlife education, and urban wildlife management were funded through sportsmen and the non-game checkoff fund. At that time, about 18% of the Game and Fish Fund, which would be hunting and fishing license dollars, was committed to non-game and T&E management. That 18% equated to $2.4 million at that time. For some history on the Heritage Fund, it was created by a voter initiative back in 1990. It was a bipartisan vote, 2-to-1, to conserve Arizona's natural, cultural, and historic resources. This voter support continued again in 98 and 2002 with the reauthorization of the lottery, with 73% in favor of continuing the lottery. The department may receive up to $10 million annually from the Heritage Fund. State parks also may receive $10 million annually from the Heritage Fund. And since the fund's inception, the department has received more than $160 million, which has been invested in Arizona's wildlife resources and conservation of it, and also local economies. Initially, the benefits of the Heritage Fund to the department were it allowed the department to expand proactive programs such as the access, habitat evaluation, acquisition, and those other programs that are currently Heritage funded. And at the same time, it reduced the financial impact of these programs on the Game and Fish Fund and federal aid, which are almost exclusively generated by sportsmen's dollars. By doing that, it also allowed the department to expand those programs. Ultimately, the Heritage Fund allowed the department to become a leader in wildlife conservation community, and since then we've assumed the lead in many fish and wildlife conservation efforts. To offer a little background here, Arizona contains one of the most diverse habitats in the nation. This results in several challenges, not only for habitat management, but also for the species that depend wholly or in part on those habitats. With that, we have a large species diversity. This also creates challenges for Arizona's future land uses, considering the number of species listed or proposed under the Endangered Species Act. With more than 800 total species in the state, there's 13 currently listed as threatened, 25 listed as endangered, 13 more listed as candidate, and another 302 that the department specifies under the species of greatest conservation need. To add to some of the challenges that are presented there, the projected population growth in Arizona over the next 40 years is fairly significant. As you can see, from once we get to 2050, the red areas are urban growth. But with this estimated growth and the location of that growth in the future, that obviously adds to those challenges for conserving wildlife. And now we're going to get into the actual Heritage Fund sub-programs. These are set up in statute for the department. 60% of the Heritage Fund goes to IOPTUM, which stands for Identification, Inventory, Acquisition, Protection, and Management. This in large part is our non-game branch and other wildlife monitoring activities. 15% goes into the Habitat Evaluation and Protection sub-program, which is resides largely in our habitat branch. Another 15% is urban wildlife, and we'll get slides that break down each one of these on what they do. 5% goes into our public access program, and another 5% goes into environmental education. The department also receives dollars from the Heritage Fund through the interest that is accrued from that fund, and those dollars go to pay for support across the whole scope of the department, whether it be human resources, purchasing, payroll, our motor pool, or information technology. Starting with the IOPTUM, this sub-program performs necessary survey and monitoring. It uses that information for endangered species listings, project planning and mitigation, and proactive habitat conservation efforts. Without Heritage, likely more species would be listed as threatened or endangered. With that lack of sound data information, the federal government would assume greater role in management of the state's wildlife and land use. Also, with the lack of that information, wildlife and land use policy would be driven by litigation to a larger extent, further reducing funding that is available for wildlife conservation. And this also results in a reduced ability for the department to represent the state's interests at the table as a voice of reason based on that sound data. The Habitat Evaluation and Protection Subfund is broken into 3 smaller groups or smaller subprograms. The first one being the Project Evaluation and Aquatic Habitat. This program reviews projects over 4,000 annually, whether they're private, state, federal. It could be anything from a fencing project to a larger development. They also work on environmental compliance with NEPA and endangered species and SHPO, mitigation, and also they're the people that are at the table with federal land management coordination with land and travel management plans. It's a critical function which seats the department at the table in local, state, and federal planning processes. By using the agency's scientific data and information, this program works with planners early in the process so they can adequately consider and avoid, when possible, mitigate and minimize any impacts to wildlife and their habitats. Determining those potential impacts to wildlife habitat is essential for proactively being able to manage wildlife in Arizona. Without Heritage, Arizona's seat at that table is vacant, and its influence on wildlife, natural resources, and land use is negated. This limits Arizona's ability to control its own future. Another program in the Habitat Evaluation subprogram is the HDMS GIS database. The HDMS system is the warehouse of data and information that provides the foundations for species listings, threats, and determinations of species. And this information is also used to be shared throughout the United States. It's one of the most valuable capabilities that Heritage pays for. It's a complex database with mapping with the GIS applications, and the data derived from that drives conservation priorities. And without Heritage, the department would have an inability to provide the scientific data to planners that's critical in guiding those sustainable land development processes. Here are a few of the products from that. Obviously, mapping is a large part of it. And this is the geospatial online tool that planners can use to access wildlife data as it would affect development. The lands program, that's responsible for acquisitions, tax obligations, and administrative work with all commission-owned properties. This program provides the necessary support to ensure the Commission's assets are conserved. The program includes water rights acquisition and protection, statewide rights of way, among other things. Department-owned properties include 33 wildlife areas, 5 public shooting ranges, 7 fish hatcheries. The wildlife areas and shooting ranges help provide fuel for the local economic engines by providing locally based activities and events. The fish hatcheries and the lakes also contribute to a economic benefit to the state of $1.3 billion in angling expenditures. 50% of all Commission-owned properties were purchased with heritage funds. Without heritage, the department would have a reduced ability to acquire and manage lands and waters, shooting ranges, wildlife areas, other things that would support wildlife conservation. Specifically, it would impact or impede the department's ability to address the state's $6 million commitment to the Zuni water rights settlement. Moving on to our urban sub-program. These funds can be expended on urban wildlife and urban wildlife habitat management activities. Some of the things that are done under that fund will include law enforcement, human-wildlife conflicts, resolving those in urban areas. There's a strong contingent of information education component to that. Several regional employees that are in the information education realm are funded out of this. There's also front counter customer service personnel that work under this program. And the department conducts wildlife inventory and research with urban funds. One of the latest examples, I think, was a mountain lion study conducted in the Tucson metropolitan area. Some of the benefits to this are obviously increased public safety through those wildlife conflicts in urban areas, greater enforcement presence. There's an increased awareness of wildlife values in urban areas. Revenue generation, the urban fishing program benefits from the urban heritage funds as well. It also improves and incorporates community involvement. There's a lot of people that are on the ground that meet face-to-face with urban residents when they're dealing with these issues or such. It also helps enhance the public's knowledge of wildlife. In terms of the public safety and the enforcement presence and even the customer service, in 2009, the department received over 2,100 phone calls regarding urban wildlife conflicts. Public access. This is synonymous with our landowner relations program. These funds are spent on public access, including maintenance and operations. This is an essential program for ensuring legal access for outdoor recreation purposes. Through this program, the department's able to leverage an additional $3 million annually to directly benefit rural businesses, improve watersheds and wildlife habitats and grazing allotments. A lot of the work that are done in some of these rural areas, the people are hired. They hire local contractors to do that work with these funds. This program helps maintain public access to over 2 million acres of land for outdoor recreation. It also provides benefits to 300 livestock operators per year through cleanups, reducing vandalism, managing access, things like that. The department uses the program funding with this to help landowners meet non-federal match requirements under the Farm Bill, landowner incentive programs, and other federal programs to achieve both ranch, farm, landowner, and wildlife objectives. Environmental education is our one of the last sub-programs here. These are educational programs that go into, in large part, go into the schools. Our Focus Wild Arizona program is a web-based K-12 curriculum. It's Arizona standards-based in different areas such as science, math, social studies, and language arts. It helps enhance public awareness of the importance of safeguarding natural resources, as well as introducing youth and the public to wildlife and nature. It's probably our primary and most effective mechanism to do just that. The 4th grade program is also standards-based, and it uses live wildlife in classroom presentations. reaches 6,500 students throughout the state every year. Under this program, we also conduct live wildlife presentations throughout the state, reaching another 120,000 Arizonans per year. In addition to this, we provide professional development for over 1,000 educators every year, who in turn provide wildlife-based lesson plans and learning curriculum to over 30,000 students a year. One of the main points here is many of Arizona's youth, especially those in urban areas, are introduced to wildlife in the department for their first and, in many cases, their only time through the environmental education program. These youth represent tomorrow's support base for wildlife conservation. Our public information program is also supported through a variety of heritage subfunds, allowing us to meet our statutory directive to develop and distribute information about wildlife and activities of the department. These funds are used to support our website, the television show, various publications, our public information officers, front counter customer service, and call center. A few examples are the magazine actually has a readership of 330,000 each year. The website receives over 300,000 unique visitors a month. It's one of our most effective ways to communicating with the public on wildlife issues and activities of the department. Customer service receive anywhere from 200 to 300 calls per day on a whole scope of issues. It's very important, though, to have an informed and engaged public, as it's extremely critical to wildlife conservation. The department also provides a grant program from the Heritage Fund. To date, more than 640 heritage grants have been awarded, totaling more than $12 million for wildlife, outdoor recreation, and other wildlife education projects throughout the state. The actual stimulus to local communities is much larger than this. Many of these grants are matched with other dollars, and they also have a economic ripple effect in many cases. Grants provide significant benefits to a host of applicants, including rural communities, governments, schools, and universities, and this helps us build partnerships to increase support for wildlife conservation at no expense to the taxpayers. To kind of summarize what those last 5 sub-programs were, some of the benefits of heritage to Arizona: allows for the conservation of all Arizona's wildlife, allowing us to fulfill that broader authority. Provides the department greater management flexibility in how we do that, just with the different funding sources that are available to us. Reduces regulatory conflicts and the expense for managing non-listed species versus listed. Also promotes multi-use and land ethic through a variety of ways. And as stated before, these funds are used to reduce human and wildlife conflicts in urban areas, provide education and outreach, and ultimately allows for resource-minded economic development and recovery, which may apply to land, water, renewable energy development, among other things. Now we'd like to get into some success stories. The purpose of following through these is not merely to celebrate the individual species success here, but also to relay the approach that the department uses in our wildlife conservation efforts, such as flexibility with in the Endangered Species Act, building partnerships, using credible scientific information, building public support. Some of the programs we're going to go through are certainly the more widely, or some of the most widely recognized in Arizona. To start off with, managing the Endangered Species Act through non-regulatory incentives and protections for landowners. Obviously, we've discussed a little bit about the research and monitoring and collecting and compiling the most credible scientific information possible. Another part of that is developing partnerships through things that are allowed under the ESA. Through our landowner incentive and relations programs, we're able to do some things there, safe harbor agreements. All these go towards utilizing a collaborative approach of all interested parties and stakeholders, and also helps utilize the flexibility of the Endangered Species Act to provide private, state, federal landowners with non-regulatory assurances and protections under ESA. Candidate conservation agreements with assurances. These allow protection for landowners through development of cooperative efforts. Should a species become listed, that they would still be protected. The landowner's interests would still be protected. A couple of examples of this were the two species of leopard frogs in Arizona that were precluded from listing because of candidate conservation agreements. And lastly, the Department and Commission's transparency and community involvement approach has proven to be effective as well. The opportunities for public engagement range from the wildlife manager to the biologist meeting someone in the field to local and regional meetings that are put on for various wildlife issues to the monthly commission meetings. Another example, a success story example would be the black-footed ferret. Ferrets were reintroduced on the Boquillas Ranch in 1996 under a 10J, which is an experimental, non-essential population classification under ESA. Public support was outstanding with this effort. Thousands of hours have been donated per year to help with this. There's also, this is a good example of local support through the Chamber of Commerce and community support. This program has benefited the economy there. It's also affected access to, in a positive way, to over 700,000 acres of state trust and private lands. Very similar to what's going on with the SB Ranch, where ferrets were reintroduced in 2007, using another mechanism under ESA to do that, and also affecting in a positive way access to public and private lands. This approach has built trust and credibility, where public access to both these ranches has been maintained for all Arizona publics, and has also led to other cooperative projects on those lands, such as habitat partnerships and education-based projects. Ultimately, this is proven to promote landowner relations, public access, and improve and promote strong community involvement. Another example would be the bald eagle. This program's success was built on partnerships, volunteers, and outstanding public support through a conservation agreement that 11 partners were involved with, private, state, and federal partners. It's been very successful. There's 10,000 pairs in the U.S. when the eagle was delisted in 2007. Currently 50 breeding pairs in Arizona, as opposed to, in contrast with 11 in 1977. The Nest Watch program allowed nest protection with minimal impacts to public recreation. Even some of those seasonal bald eagle breeding closures are accepted and supported by Arizona's publics. Some examples would be at Lake Pleasant and Roosevelt Lake. This is due to extensive outreach that focuses on the benefits and the values of this. This program has also been used to as a forum to educate school-age children on wildlife management activities and the department's mission, and is really benefited from a large public support through the outreach and education efforts. Apache trout was listed as threatened in 1967. Under the 40 rule, they were allowed to legally harvest them as a sport fish starting in 1975. This is a flexibility under the ESA that appears to be the only one of its kind in the nation as far as a threatened fish species being able to be harvested as a sport fish. Department's been leading the recovery efforts for this species. Currently, there's 27 recovery streams in place. The goal is for 30 recovery streams to delist this species. As a result of all these efforts, the project did receive a sizable grant in the amount of $4 million, which is over a 10-year period. This is another example of extensive partnerships paying dividends with partnerships with anglers and the tribal communities. Now we're going to move into the budget aspect. This pie chart represents the Game and Fish Department's entire budget for 2010, and then the different breakdowns from the different funding sources. The 2010 total budget was $103 million. However, recent declines in the Wildlife Conservation Fund revenues and sweeps in the watercraft, OHV, and heritage Heritage Fund, bring that budget to approximately $86 million. It's also important to note here again, the department receives no general tax revenues. Instead, the department operates more like a business with the user pay, user benefit model. Breakdown of the actual Heritage budget summary. The 2010 fiscal year budget was $11.3 million. The amount over the $10 million is where carry forward funds from the previous year, and also that interest earned on the funds. There's 68.5 employees funded by the Heritage Fund, with roughly $4 million going towards salaries. Operating budget is around $2.4 million across the sub-programs. Land acquisition makes up, again, a part of that under the IOPTUM. That's $2.1 million. One of the big benefits of the Heritage Fund is it's also used to match contributions for federal aid grants. $1.4 million of the Heritage Fund is used to help match the $14.6 million the department receives in the PR and DJ federal aid funds. Another $1.2 million is used to match completely the state wildlife grants, which are also a federal grant in the amount of $2 million. And $121,000 is used to match another federal grant in the under Section 6, which is a $300,000 grant. Equipment in the amount of $500,000 is also part of the 2010 budget. From looking at the Heritage match contributions, this basically means millions in federal grant funding would be forfeited without another match funding source, which in this case would likely be sportsman's dollars, hunter and angler license dollars. In summary, the Heritage Fund is critical to wildlife conservation. Sportsman's dollars have funded critical wildlife conservation programs before the receipt of Heritage. Without the Heritage Fund, sportsman's dollars would again fund critical programs. There would obviously be significant impacts to other budgets and priorities throughout the agency without the Heritage Fund, and a permanent loss of the $10 million per year would require a complete reconstruction of the department. Some of the effects to Arizona without the Heritage Fund, there would be losses in capabilities for law enforcement. There's currently 13 captive breeding populations of threatened and endangered wildlife supported by Heritage Funds. There would be impacts to the access to public lands for all types of recreational activities. Urban wildlife and human wildlife conflict management would be severely impacted. Game and sport fish management would be impacted, as some of those funds that are used for that would need to go in other ways to meet critical needs. There would be a loss in wildlife education and outreach capabilities. Shooting range operations and development would also be affected by this, much like the game and sport fish management programs would be. Also that some of the administration of the permits are handled through the lands program previously discussed. The department's voice at the federal planning table would be diminished in many cases, if not negated. Primary funding mechanism for the recovery and conservation of some of the state's most imperiled wildlife, such as black-footed ferret or the Apache trout, would would also be impacted. Department's ability to provide robust science-based planning tools that help guide responsible development, those would be impacted, and ultimately programs that support a $2.3 billion industry in the state that results from wildlife recreation would be impacted. Looking at a specific example, our wildlife managers, who are our conservation officers in the field, they are the point people out in those areas throughout the state. We looked at some of the impacts that would actually be felt by those positions with the loss of Heritage. And a lot of these are just day-to-day activities, one being ranch access. Currently, the access coordinator administers those. There's a lot of administration that goes into that, a lot of time spent doing that. Without Heritage, that would fall to the wildlife manager, who probably would not have nearly enough time to be effective as we have been. Forest Service grazing plans, currently habitat specialists in the regions and in the Phoenix headquarters, they administer those. This is a proactive approach. Those people are on the, they're at the table at the front when it starts. They get to review and provide comments and input to those processes at the beginning. Without heritage, it would fall to the wildlife manager to administer that, and it would be reactive. It would be after the fact, and it would be as things came across or run into in the field. Another practical example would be deer surveys. For instance, if a wildlife manager has scheduled to do 3 hours of flight time to do deer surveys in their district, that would likely be cut to 1.5 hours, which has an impact on the quality of the data for the survey. Nuisance wildlife would be another practical example. We're currently in our urban areas, the wildlife manager and the urban wildlife specialists work together to resolve issues and work with communities to assist them in helping themselves in dealing with wildlife and nuisance conflicts. Without heritage, the wildlife manager would be that would fall to that person. A lot of the responses of like the 2,100 calls received in 2009, they'd be responded to when the wildlife manager is available. They have large districts they patrol and they can't be everywhere at once. This would obviously result in more of those human-wildlife conflicts, but also increased complaints and decreased satisfaction. Ultimately, this would lead to less time and less customer focus. Shifting gears just a bit here, the history of the Wildlife Conservation Fund. As I stated at the beginning, the budget plan did propose repealing the Proposition 105, which could have an effect on this. Wildlife conservation funds are the monies received from tribal gaming. This was the Prop 202 that was passed in 2002. It passed after the Prop 105, which is the Voter Protection Act, so therefore it is currently voter protected. The purpose of this fund was to conserve, enhance, and restore Arizona's diverse wildlife resources and habitats, and may include the acquisition of real property. Very similar to the wording of the mission of the department, but it is one of the most flexible fund sources the department currently has. Since 2004, $33 million has come into the department through the WCF fund. Some potential impacts to the Prop 105 repeal, and again, I have to state these are potential. Currently, there are 21.5 employees funded out of WCF. There's $800,000 of WCF funds that are used for that federal match discussed earlier with the heritage funds. Some of the WCF projects include wildlife area operations and maintenance, shooting ranges, and also shooting programs. The Scholastic Clay Target Program is funded solely out of the WCF. Another example is dam safety. State currently owns dams that were constructed over the past 50 years that don't meet current federal safety standards. The department's dam safety program, which is intended to bring the high hazard classified dams up to current safety standards, is funded in part by WCF. Some other projects are our water catchment work, watchable wildlife programming and development of facilities. The department's annual outdoor expo is largely funded by WCF funds. The non-toxic ammunition program for provided in the Condor area is another one that's funded through WCF. GIS and radio system improvements, and also in part the Apache Trout Recovery Program. Looking at both Heritage and WCF together and what those combined impacts could potentially be, we'll be looking at a $2.75 million match requirement that would have to be replaced from another funding source, which would, again, likely be sportsman's dollars. Possible, or looking at the loss of 90 staff, which would reduce, obviously, knowledge, or the department's effectiveness, and also scientific credibility. This would essentially cause a ripple effect, as all programs throughout the agency would be affected, whether being reduced or having to be eliminated. Ultimately, this would reduce products and services provided to the public and result in decreased support for wildlife conservation as a whole. To take another look at how the Heritage Fund and the WCF funds would affect the operations of the department, this slide displays the eligibility of those funds versus activities. The activities are on the left side of the screen there. It's not everything the department does, but it's a good list of the larger activities. And if you take away everything that's in the red, the large bolded X's that remain are those funds that are eligible to fund those types of activities. As a good example, look at the match, which is fifth from the bottom. If you take the WCF and Heritage away, you essentially have one other source that can be used for federal match, and that's the Game and Fish Fund. On the far right, you'll see Watercraft also has that, but that's specifically used only to match with Coast Guard federal funds. It would have significant impacts on the department's flexibility and ability to carry out its mission. Some ongoing and future challenges the department will be facing and how this would affect that. First will be the sport fish stocking program. The department's currently conducting a Section 7 consultation. I'll get a little more detailed on that. In 1983, the Commission established the non-game program and also funded other activities to ensure implementation of the agency's mission. Those same issues and challenges exist today and have become more diverse. For instance, the sport fish stocking program, the department's going to have to maintain an active non-game or threat and endanger program to ensure compliance with the results of the sport fish stocking program consultation. As part of that consultation, the department will need to make financial and resource commitments to mitigate the impacts of stocking on listed species over a significant time frame. The alternative is not to stock in those areas where conflicts occur in it, and which would impact our constituents and as well as local economies. As we discussed, the sport fish stocking program contributes largely to that $1.3 billion economic benefit to related to angling. Apache trout delisting, as I stated before, 27 streams have been completed, and looking for 3 more to meet the target for delisting. It's one of those things where the department wouldn't be unwilling or unable to just stop right now should funding not be available through Heritage or WCF. Some of the other challenges include species listings by groups that would provide a significant regulatory blanket across the state's landscape and would ultimately regulate land use. Some of them are listed here. This would result in significant conflicts with the state's development plans, whether it be for alternative energy, housing, or water use, all of which have been identified by both the executive and legislative branches as being essential to pulling Arizona out of the current economic recession. Other ongoing and future challenges would be access for recreation, all types of recreation, alternative funding for the department to carry out wildlife conservation, customer recruitment and retention, whether it's hunters, anglers, wildlife watchers, just general wildlife enthusiasts. That's going to continue to be a ongoing challenge as all state fish and wildlife agencies are facing. And then lastly, but definitely not inclusively, would be the expected population growth in the state of Arizona, which will further cause issues with those impacts. So in closing, with the presentation, to repeat some of the history before, Arizonans do want the Heritage Fund, created in 1990 again through that broad coalition of Arizona citizens, passed by a 2-to-1 bipartisan vote, supported again repeatedly in 1998 and again in 2002 with the reauthorization of the lottery. With that, we are prepared to take any questions, unless Mr. Hovatter would like to add a few things.
No, I think rather than add anything, we do have some questions from some of our online folks, and we will endeavor to answer as many of those as we can. We had very early on at the start of this, we had almost 100 viewers and listeners on the web, and we really do appreciate folks coming to learn more about this. I would say that I should start or note on some of the questions that we've been asked that the department has a statutory and customer service obligation to keep its customers informed about issues that might significantly affect our ability to fulfill our state mission or our ability to meet customer expectations. And that said, Arizona, much akin to other states and the federal government, does put statutory limits on lobbying by its state agencies. We've had several questions about specific legislation and whether or not the department supports that. What I would say is that making a decision on legislative support is the purview of the Arizona Game and Fish Commission. The commission is a 5-person commission. They're appointed to 5-year terms, overlapping 5-year terms by Arizona's governors. So in advance of the commission having taken such a position, it would not be appropriate for the department to take a position on that legislation. I will say that I hope that our presentation tonight has, in fact, informed our customers and our constituents and many people who may have not known they were customers of Arizona Game and Fish from the type of services that Heritage funds, and that we have given you some information for you to review what you believe about the impact of proposed budget proposals on the department. And then we do need to leave it to our informed and educated customers to make their own decisions about how or if they want to translate that information into action. Having said that, we had a question from Debbie. Debbie said she had both a question and a comment. It said, if we voted on the Heritage Fund, how can the legislature eliminate it and use lottery funds for general purpose? I might understand a temporary emergency measure, but isn't that even bait and switch, no pun intended? I would have never voted on approving the lottery if I did not know the proceeds would be earmarked to do perpetual good. Heritage, there is a voter protection provision, of course, in state law, but Heritage was passed quite a few years before voter protection was in effect. And so the fund, while clearly articulating the voters of Arizona's preference for how monies would be used, is not voter protected. And ergo, there is some flexibility in how those funds might be apportioned and used. Do you have anything you want to add to that? Okay. We had a question from Britt about how much money does the Arizona Lottery generate for the state of Arizona, and what percentage of the total funds generated goes to the Heritage Fund, and where does the remainder of the lottery money go? And I would answer that by saying the lottery does post, and I would invite anybody who had detailed questions to go to the www.arizonalottery.com website, and they provide a lot of detail about that. They do post annual financial reports as required by statute. The most recent one is 2008. I presume there's probably still compiling 2009. And it notes that the lottery in 2008 generated $472.9 million for the state of Arizona. The website goes on to show the many organizations and the many ways that money is apportioned. But $20 million of that by statute goes to the Heritage Fund, or up to $20 million. And in fact, $20 million was apportioned in 2008 by the Lottery Fund. $10 million of that goes to state parks, and $10 million of that would go to Arizona Game and Fish Department for the purposes we've just outlined. That year there was a full apportionment. That is a capped apportionment. It can be no more than that. If there is a real decline in lottery funds, it can be less than that in a given year. We had a question. Let's see. We have from Happy and Bold. I think we can take this one on. It says, can you explain why the department not being able to provide data would lead to more species being listed under the Endangered Species Law? And I think, among the ways that can have have that effect is that in the process of making decisions on endangered species, it is possible to to arrive at a table with what may be the best science or appear to be best science available, but may still be in many respects seem thinner than anyone would like. Decisions can still be made about endangered species. Very often need to be made about endangered species based on best science available, which may not be, again, which may be slimmer than we'd like it, sometimes like it to be. The department is focused on T&E species through what Heritage Fund enables us to do. In this earlier slide you saw, we have about 38 T&E species that we are actively working on, to include 13 captive breeding programs. We also engage through the Heritage funding in a lot of monitoring and surveying, so that we have a very good picture and a growing a picture that's growing by or supported by a growing amount of data about what T&E species or candidate species that might be considered for T&E listing really look like on the ground. So I would note that our inability to show up at the table or to show up at the table with inadequately funded, inadequately supported capabilities for gathering information on the ground could lead to decisions that are still based on best science available, but may not be adequate to portray a true picture of a species on the ground. I would reach back, I guess, to Gila monster, and I know there was a time when the Gila monster was the first protected reptile in Arizona, and its apparent rarity caused a lot of concern about that species. We still have a concern about it. It's still a protected reptile for very good reasons, but it turned out that as we learn more about its life history, that this animal spends 98% of its whole life underground, and ergo its apparent rarity was driven in some part by just a lack of understanding early on of that animal's life history, and recognizing that it was more abundant in its preferred habitat than we had realized early on. You got anything to add to that? I don't think we don't have any other questions here that fall into the. We have some commentary, and I think I'll let that commentary find its way to the internet, or find its way to our website, where folks can come and make comment about their issues. But do you have any other things you'd like to raise? Or
any of the people attending have anything they want to ask? How are we doing, Bob? We're all good?
Okay.
All right. Well,
I think no further questions.
I think that concludes the presentation. I'd like to thank everybody that got on the website to view, and everybody that came here tonight. Thank you.